Are the Assyrians and the Chaldeans the same people? Some say no. The difference between an Assyrian and a Chaldean is the difference between night and day, one person said. The Chaldean patriarch Mar Emanuel Delhi took it one step further. A Chaldean who claims he is Assyrian is a traitor, and an Assyrian who claims he is a Chaldean is a traitor. That's what the patriarch said. Let's first identify who these people are that call themselves either Assyrian or Chaldean. It's often understood that a Chaldean is a member of the church called the Chaldean Church or the Chaldean Catholic Church, and an Assyrian is a member of the Assyrian Church of the East. And it's often believed that the Assyrians come from the area called Urmia and Hakkari, whereas the Chaldeans come from an area called the Nineveh Plain, from towns and villages such as Tilkepe, Alqush, and other villages in that specific area. Now, is this an accurate understanding? Well, not really. Why? People who are members of the Church of the East or the Assyrian Church of the East call themselves Assyrians. That is true, by and large. But the members of the Church of the East or the Assyrian Church of the East who live in India are not Assyrian. They are Indian, for example. Now, some may claim descent from Assyrians a long time ago, who migrated to India over the centuries, but by and large they speak their own language. Their native language is Malayalam, and they are natives to India. So although not Assyrian, they are members of the Assyrian Church of the East. And to complicate matters, and we'll understand why later, some refer to their church as Chaldean instead of Assyrian, but it is affiliated with the Assyrian Church of the East. So what we understand is that these members, who are members of the Assyrian Church of the East, are not actually Assyrian, but are Indian, native Indians. Alternatively, Assyrians who are also members of the Chaldean Church, in Urmia and Salamis, for example, also view themselves as Assyrians, but they are members of the Chaldean Church. This is also true of Assyrians who are from Hakkari, for example. The people of Baz and other tribes are members of the Chaldean Church, but identify themselves as ethnically Assyrian. But what about the origin of these words then, Chaldean or Assyrian? What do they mean? First, the word Assyria, or Aturaya. This word is known in history. Assyria is a land, a territory. It has a documented history. It has a demography. What does this mean? Assyria is an identifiable land, the land of Ashur in old records. That is contemporaneous writing from the ancient days. An Assyrian king often boasts, "I am the king of Assyria, the king of the universe," etc., etc. He identifies himself as the king of a particular land and ruling over a particular people known as the Assyrians. Those are contemporaneous records from the ancient past. There are clear references in ancient writings of the Assyrian people. These are very clear. The term Atur in modern Assyrian or Syriac, the language of the Assyrians, is a known term, and it is accepted and used. It is a native term to the Assyrians. What about the term Chaldean? The same cannot be said of this term. There is no contemporaneous reference to a people called Chaldean in any of the cuneiform records. The king most associated with this term Chaldean is King Nebuchadnezzar. But King Nebuchadnezzar never refers to himself as a Chaldean. He referred to himself as the king of Babylon. That was a city, a place, a center, not a country. Unlike the term Assyria in Syriac or Assyrian, or, if you will, Chaldean, there is no such term as the land of Chaldea, meaning the territory of Chaldea. a term borrowed from Greek and Latin. It is not, in other words, native to the people, not like, for example, Atur. Atur is native to the Syriac-speaking people, whereas the term Chaldea is a foreign invention. So why do some people call themselves Assyrian and some people call themselves Chaldean? Well, they don't really do that, in truth. That is a later imposition. The native self-designation is actually Suraya or Suriaya, at times translated as Syriac or even Syrian. But what does this term mean? What does Suraya mean? What does Syriac mean? Where does it come from? It comes from Assyria and no other place. It's not by coincidence that the people calling themselves Suraye or Suriaye come from the land known as Assyria. Syrian and Assyrian have the same etymological root. The term can also mean Christian, by the way, but one has to understand this within the context of the Near East. Most people surrounding the Assyrians were Muslims, not Christian. And so the word Assyrian or Suraya came to also refer to the Assyrian Christian people. So it's another word for Christian. Although the Assyrians have their own word, strictly speaking, that means Christian, which is Mshichaya. So Suraya is an ethnic term, but it can also mean Mshichaya or Christian in Assyrian. Why? Again, one has to understand the context. Assyrians lived in a predominantly Muslim area, and given that most people practiced Islam and they did not, Assyrian came also to mean, through the word Suraya, Christian. What about Chaldean? Well, the truth is that the term Chaldean was applied to the people that lived in Assyria because of the term's biblical significance, as in Ur of the Chaldees in the Bible, a phrase that had no historical accuracy. Why did it have no historical accuracy? Ur, after all, was Sumerian, not Chaldean, as an ancient Chaldean. But Western writers thought that since the people lived in the ancient land of Ur, Chaldee was the proper and most biblically appropriate and significant name. Therefore, the term stuck to the people, to the language, and even to the land. Now, this was all done during times when the Christian religion, rather than the national heritage, was most important. This did not happen in the 20th century. It happened much earlier, at a time when religion took precedence over all other forms of identification. And so the term stuck and was used by all of those who spoke the same language, who spoke Surit or Syriac or Aramaic. Some took it as an honorable term and used it, and others did not prefer to use it. But it was not understood as a designation that separated people, for example, Suraya from Chaldea, Assyrian from Chaldean. It was simply a reference that was used by some people, indeed, perhaps most people, in formal circles, but was not ever viewed as something that separated people from each other. In other words, it did not split the people into different ethnic groups. And it certainly did not mean that if you called yourself Chaldean in the past, that you were Catholic, and if you did not use the word Chaldean, you were not Catholic. That's not the case in history. So, for example, when Mar Yohanan Sulaka, who became patriarch of the church that was united with Rome in 1553, the term Chaldean was not used to separate the people who adopted Catholicism from the people who did not. That term was used for all of the people who were members of the Church of the East. Again, let's think about the reference to Ur of the Chaldees. All of the people were referred to as Chaldean or Chaldees, rather than some of the people who decided to unite with Rome. So the truth is that the word Chaldean was used alongside Assyrian. Mar Yohanan Sulaqa, was the patriarch of the Chaldeans, just as he was patriarch of the Assyrians. The terms meant the same thing. But over time, the word Chaldean came to be used more often, again because of its biblical significance. It was only later that the term became used to identify members of a church that was affiliated with Rome and not with the Church of the East. Whether called Assyrian or Chaldean, all of the people spoke the same language, which was called Assyrian or Syriac, or sometimes Chaldean. It was the same exact language, whatever terminology one used. But here, when we're talking about the difference between Chaldean and Assyrian church, we have to understand the language is the same language, in fact, the same branch of the same language, Eastern Syriac, and not anything else. For example, in looking at the dictionary of Martuma Odu, Martuma Odu was a bishop, a Chaldean bishop, of the town of Urmia and its surrounding villages. Martuma Odu's dictionary is called, in French, the Chaldean dictionary. In the Assyrian language, or in the Syriac language, Lexiqunt Lishana Suriaya, Syriac. But in his explanation, in the very first footnote of that dictionary, Martuma Odu explains that the term Suriaya, or Suraya, comes from Asuraya or Aturaya. In other words, the word Syriac comes from the word Assyrian for Martuma Odu. Why is this significant? Well, again, think of the interchangeability of all of these terms for a very enlightened and educated bishop, Martuma Odu, who thought that in French you can refer to the language as Chaldean, or a Latin-based language, but in Syriac you can refer to it as Suriaya or Syriac, and then explain and understand that the word Syrian and Chaldean are the same as Assyrian. So from the mind of Martuma Odu, we see that the word Chaldean is no different than the word Suriaya or Assyrian. In other words, they all have the same root, and it all goes back to Athuraya or Aturaya or Assyrian. Mar Yohanan in Urmia was a bishop of the Church of the East. His example is also interesting. When an American or a British missionary would refer to him as a Nestorian, which is a rather derogatory term for a member of the Church of the East, Mar Yohanan took issue and asked that he be referred to as a Chaldean rather than a Nestorian. It means that all of our people are Chaldean. They are of an ethnic group. The term is an honorable biblical term and means nothing more than that. It does not mean that I am a member of the Catholic Church. It simply means that I am a speaker of a particular language and have a particular heritage. And I would like that label to be Chaldean because of my biblical roots. Now, does the word Chaldean mean anything different than Assyrian? Not for Mar Yohanan. There is no separation between these terms for many of the people that supported the use of the word Chaldean. Another such person was Hormuz Rassam, an archaeologist who worked with the noted British archaeologist Austen Henry Layard. For Hormuz Rassam, the word Chaldean was simply derived from Assyrian ancestry. There's absolutely no difference between the two. Well, what about today? The people still speak the same language and inhabit the same territory. There is no record of the Chaldean, or those who call themselves Chaldeans, coming from any other place than what is known as Assyria in history, or northern Mesopotamia. Developments in history, such as the cruel atrocities committed against them, regardless of the name they carry, have forged in them an understanding. They are one people on the one road to history that has become blurred as a result of the ignorance and disputes of bishops and the intervention of foreign powers. No person is a traitor for calling himself or herself an Assyrian or Chaldean. The crime against truth, rather, is understanding that the two are separate as night and day. The origin of the people calling themselves Assyrian or Chaldean today, historically and ethnically, as well as linguistically, is the same. Now, in terms of identity, that's a whole other issue, and we will get into that in another episode. But the truth in history is that Assyrian and Chaldean are the same exact people. Thank you, and see you next time.